The movie begins in Somalia, East Africa, 1992. Years of civil war among rival clans causes famine on a biblical scale, resulting in over 300,000 civilian deaths due to starvation. On a Saturday of October 1993, the citizens fought over the food supplies in a distribution center. While the heavily armed rebels roam around the civilians, US soldiers in a helicopter are scouting the area. Suddenly, the rebels start shooting at the civilians. Then the US soldiers report the situation to the base and ask permission to engage, but the base declines. Instead, they call them back to base. The scene then shifts to Bakara Market, AIDID-controlled territory. An American soldier named Sergeant Gibson Hoot surveys the area looking for his target, Osman Ali Atto, a faction leader selling firearms to AIDID's militia. When Atto leaves the city, Hoot immediately notifies his team. As soon as they are alerted, they follow the vehicle of their target. Helicopters instantly track down Atto and take him to the military base. Once in custody, General Garrison talks to Atto about his affiliation with AIDID and his militia as their arms supplier. Atto calmly deals with the interrogation and makes it clear that capturing him will not make AIDID surrender and that it's their civil war, making the intervention of America unnecessary. Garrison disagrees and insists that their intervention is because of the concerning toll of deaths under AIDID's rule, which makes their situation a genocide. Meanwhile, at the US Army headquarters, the Rangers gather at the helicopter piloted by Chief Warrant Cliff Wolcott and pick up Hoot in the meeting area somewhere in the desert. At the base, Todd Blackburn, a young private first-class recruit, registers for his unit and expresses his excitement to fight. He, later on, is given under the temporary supervision of Sergeant Eversmann. That night, the army feasts on a hunted boar initiated by Hoot. However, Captain Steele, a strict commanding officer, is displeased and reprimands Sergeant Sanderson for letting his men do as they please. Because of his unreasonable attitude, many Rangers make fun of him by impersonating him. Sometime in the evening, the soldiers spend their free time bonding with their unit. Among them is Lieutenant Beals's group, discussing the current situation of the Civil War, where Eversmann shares his respect for them, and that he is there to make a difference for the poor. Suddenly, Beals has a seizure, and as a result, the lieutenant is removed from duty. The next day, Sergeant Eversmann is assigned to be in command of Ranger Chalk 4, as Beals is sent home. Moments later, General Garrison informs the Rangers about the intel they received on an upcoming senior cabinet meeting of AIDID. Their mission is to raid and abduct AIDID's Tier 1 personalities, Omar Salad, his political advisor, and Abdi Hassan, his interior minister. After that, Eversmann gathers his men and instructs them to take the operation seriously as elite soldiers and assures them that everything will be fine. Despite the danger of the operation, some of them seem to take it lightly, as they purposely leave some of their valuables behind, thinking they'll be back before dark. A few hours later, a street informant, Abdi, leads them to the location of AIDID's men as Garrison watches from the Joint Operations Center. He then becomes anxious as he reveals the location to Garrison and the operation begins. Little did they know the Somalis are already alerted of their incoming attack as they prepare for battle by burning tires, and the civilians evacuate. As soon as the army touches the base, all the units deploy and position themselves at their stations. They smoothly execute their plan. But when a Somali shoots an RPG at the Black Hawk helicopter, luckily missing it, Blackburn falls and gets severely injured. 3 HMMMWVs, led by SGT Jeff Strucker, are detached from the convoy to return Blackburn to the UN-held Mogadishu airport. The situation intensifies as the Somalis continue to attack aggressively. Blackburn is then taken on a stretcher to the target building to return him through the Humvees back to base. Meanwhile, Sanderson's unit successfully arrives at the target building, and they begin to load the prisoners into the Humvees along with Blackburn. During the transport, Grimes is separated from Eversmann's group by an RPG explosion. The Humvees then leave the area to return to base as Sergeant Strucker leads them out. The Somalis continue to shoot down the retreating Humvees, where Sergeant Pilla gets shot and killed in the process. Thus, Hoot fires back at the enemies. Shortly after, the Somalis use an RPG to bring down one Black Hawk helicopter piloted by Wolcott, and it crashes deep within the city. After that, Eversmann's group is ordered to set a defensive perimeter on the crash site to check for survivors. He orders 3 of his men to hold their line while he and the rest of the group go to the crash site. Meanwhile, Sergeant McKnight's group is still loading the prisoners. Sanderson suggests half of the team go to the crash site. Things get tense as the Somalis begin surrounding the site. A survivor from the crash confronts them to buy himself some time to get rescued. At the same time, Eversmann's group gets ambushed on the way to the site. The Somalis rain down bullets at them, injuring one of their men. During the encounter, Sergeant Urek gets separated from the group and hides in a house. Inside, he finds a woman with her children. He assures them that he is harmless and silently walks away. Once outside, a child with a gun tries to shoot him, but he dodges, and the child accidentally kills his father. Meanwhile, Strucker's Humvees arrive at the base with the prisoners and their injured men. Afterwards, the rescue team arrives at the crash site to help the aircrew. Eversmann's group also arrives to assist them. They manage to rescue the survivor, but leave the other crew because of the increasing threat in the area. Sometime later, McKnight's Humvees could not reach the site due to miscommunication with the air support and had casualties on the way. Meanwhile, Nelson and Twombly decide to leave their post and meet up with Eversmann. Covering each other's backs, Twombly fires his gun near Nelson, which makes Nelson temporarily deaf. During all this, the Somalis manage to shoot down another Black Hawk helicopter piloted by Chief Warrant Durant. It crashes several blocks away from the site with no ground forces nearby. Fortunately, Durant survives the crash, but the air support fails to notice him. Back at the base, the alarming situation of the operation prompts the soldiers to return and recover their comrades. The others who are not part of the original assault line up to join the fight, including Specs, who was initially replaced for his injury. Meanwhile, Twombly and Nelson carefully traverse around the battlefield to find the crash site. Nelson spots a running soldier and opens fire. Luckily, Urek recognizes them and groups up to find the site. After a while, two Delta Force snipers, Shughart and Gordon, request to secure the second crash site on foot. Concurrently, McKnight's Humvees driving to the crash site are confronted with the heavily armed Somalis, causing many casualties. McKnight handles the dire situation by taking their injured men and following the order of the air support to head back to a different route. He is almost killed by an explosion, but manages to get away. Eventually, the second crash site is surrounded by the Somalis. Durant defends himself with a broken leg, shooting every Somali approaching the helicopter. Shughart and Gordon arrive at the crash site, where they find Durant and they rescue him. Afterwards, McKnight stops the Humvees and sees his men's condition. He decides to abandon the cause in favor of returning the wounded to the base and replenishing their gear. At that time, Eversmann's group stays in the area to defend the Black Hawk and are forced to wait until reinforcements arrive. While Durant covers their back, Shughart and Gordon protect the area at the second crash site. But countless Somali people keep charging at them and eventually overruns the site. Shughart and Gordon are brutally killed, and the citizens celebrate their victory by removing their equipment and carrying them. Durant is then captured by Adid's order. After some time, Strucker's group arrives in Mogadishu, but the roads make it impossible for the Humvees to pass through. Thus, Hoot suggests moving on foot to the second crash site. A few hours later, Sanderson manages to find Eversmann's group. At the same time, Urek, Nelson, and Twombly find them. They set out to cover the trio to reach them, but a Somali notices them and opens fire. Twombly is shot on the backpack, and Corporal Smith helps him but gets shot as well. Smith is critically injured and needs immediate medical care, but Garrison cannot risk any more helicopters, so they have to maintain their situation themselves. Meanwhile, Strucker's group arrives at the second crash site. Hoot threatens the citizens to stay away from the helicopter and shortly bombs it. At the base, Garrison requests reinforcements from the Pakistani base, but it will take a few more hours before they get there. Meanwhile, Durant is held captive by Adid's lieutenant. He asks if he's a ranger killing his men, and Durant responds he is just a pilot. He then makes it clear that Adid will not simply surrender, and there will be no peace, as there will always be deaths in Somalia. In an abandoned building, Eversmann's group attempts to treat Smith's fatal wound as Grimes prepares coffee for Sanderson. Suddenly, an explosion occurs, and the Somalis continue to attack them with bombs cornering the Rangers. During this, Strucker's group stealthily approaches the enemies from behind. They successfully take one of the explosives and use it against them. Strucker's group then reunites with them. After a while, reinforcements start to move out to the crash site and help the Rangers. Meanwhile, at the site, Smith and Eversmann have a conversation where Eversmann commends his bravery in saving Twombly. Smith asks for a favor to tell his parents that he fought well, but Eversmann tells him he should be the one to tell them. While speaking, he takes his final breath and succumbs to his wounds. After their loss, Hoot tells Eversmann that he has no control over who lives and dies in the war, and encourages him to focus on leading his men home. A few hours later, the Somalis opened fire on the Rangers again. The air support arrived at the site, but couldn't identify the enemy between them. Given the situation, Eversmann makes his way to mark the target with a strobe and identifies the foes. With the signal, the air support shoots the enemies down with guns and rocket attacks. Shortly after, the armored cars and Humvees arrive at Steele's location and rescue the remaining men and their casualties, but the Rangers will have to hold out for a few minutes until the convoy arrives. Upon arriving, they save the Rangers and recover the bodies. Inevitably, the excavation of Wolcott's body from the helicopter delays the mission. 3 hours later, the rescue team successfully retrieves the bodies from the helicopter and bombs it. The Humvees, loaded with the wounded, do not have enough room for the Rangers and Delta Force soldiers. In spite of this, they are forced to run alongside the armored vehicles toward the safe zone to the stadium. The groups run and face violent encounters along the way, but they escape successfully. They safely arrive at the safe zone without casualties. The groups are provided with water at the stadium, and the injured men are immediately taken to be treated. In the surgery room, Garrison sees the conditions of his men and cleans the blood off the floor. Eversmann sees Hoot preparing his supplies and asks if he's going back into action. Hoot tells him that he is better off alone and leaves the camp. He then talks to Smith at the morgue, where he promises to fulfill his wish to tell his parents that he fought well. He bids his last goodbye to Smith and leaves. The movie concludes as the closing credits detail the results of the raid. 19 American soldiers were killed, with over 1,000 Somalis dead. Durant was released after 11 days of captivity, whereas Delta snipers Gordon and Shugart were the first soldiers to be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor since the Vietnam War. On August 2nd, 1996, Adid was killed in a battle with a rival clan. As a result, General Garrison retired from active duty the following day. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.